Patricia and Nuria, a couple since college, shared a special connection. Their parents always praised them, proud to see how they had built a life together. They were both passionate about sports, and hiking was their great escape from the world. That weekend, they decided to get away from the urban hustle and bustle and head into a remote corner of the mountains, where rumors of a haunted forest were nothing more than stories for tourists. The idea of facing a place with strange legends was exciting to them. They loaded their backpacks, put the equipment in the old truck, and headed to the parking lot at the foot of the mountain. Ready to disconnect from everything? Asked Nuria, smiling as she adjusted her backpack. Always with you, replied Patricia, giving her a soft kiss before starting to walk. The path was steep, but that didn't stop them. They passed the time laughing and talking as they gathered some wild fruits along the trail. The sun bathed the forest in warm light, making the idea of a haunted forest seem ridiculous. They came to a perfect spot to camp, a clearing next to crystal clear water. The place was magical, with the clear sky showing a glimpse of stars as night slowly fell. They lit a small bonfire and sat together, enjoying the tranquility. But as the sun sank below the horizon, something changed. The air, which had previously felt cool and pleasant, suddenly became thick and heavy. The shadows around them lengthened in disturbing ways, and an inexplicable chill made them shiver. Do you hear that? Nuria said, frowning. Patricia stopped stirring the embers of the bonfire and paid attention. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but then she heard it clearly, a guttural murmur, as if someone or something was speaking in an ancient, strange language. Suddenly, a melody began to float through the air, like a woman singing from the depths of the forest. Who's there? Patricia shouted, standing up, but there was no answer, only the echo of the melody, which now seemed closer. Suddenly, the sound of a sinister, dry laugh resonated in the distance, and bright eyes, like animals lurking in the darkness, appeared between the trees. Panic took hold of them. We have to get out of here, Nuria said nervously, quickly gathering her things. As they tried to put out the fire and gather their equipment, the cries of a small child echoed through the forest, enveloping them like a shadow. The air was charged with an irrational, almost primal fear. But before they could move, something else made them stop. Heavy footsteps, dragging themselves through the bushes. Run! Patricia shouted. They both ran towards the truck, but the footsteps followed them. Someone or something was chasing them, and it wasn't part of the legends of the forest. The guttural laughter was heard again, this time much closer, followed by the snap of branches breaking. Then they saw it, a man, tall and corpulent, with dirty and torn clothes, emerged from between the trees. He held a knife in his hand, his face distorted by an expression of madness. It can't be, Nuria gasped. That's the prisoner who escaped from the prison near here. The news had come out in the last few weeks, but they never imagined they would meet him. The man advanced towards them with a chilling calm, as if he enjoyed the terror in their eyes. Patricia searched desperately for her car keys in her pocket, but as she reached in, horror hit her full force. She had lost them. They're gone, she shouted desperately. The keys are gone. Nuria, her heart racing, looked around for a way out, but they were trapped. The forest surrounded them, dark and impenetrable, and the man kept coming closer, his knife reflecting the faint moonlight. We have to run, Nuria said, taking Patricia's hand. Now! With no other option, they both rushed into the forest, dodging branches and roots as the sound of the man's footsteps followed them, ever closer. Patricia's breathing became labored, and the fear of dying enveloped them with each step. The wind began to howl through the trees, as if the forest itself was guiding them. But the man's laughter and guttural sounds wouldn't leave them alone. Suddenly, Nuria tripped and fell to the ground with a cry of pain. No, 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 she sobbed as she tried to get up. We can't stop, Patricia said, helping her up. The man was getting closer. His footsteps echoed in the darkness. They both knew that if he reached them, there would be no escape. The crying that had seemed distant before now mixed with their own gasps and tears. Amidst the confusion and fear, a ray of light slipped through the trees, guiding them to what looked like a small abandoned cabin. There! Nuria shouted. They ran toward the cabin, hoping it was safe enough to hide. They rushed to the door, slamming it shut behind them. Inside, the air was cold and damp, and a broken window gave a view of the forest outside, where the figure of the man continued to prowl, looking for his next prey. They stood silently, listening, praying that he would not find them. But they knew that at any moment, it could all end. The silence in the cabin was overwhelming, broken only by the sound of their labored breathing and the distant crunch of branches under the footsteps of the man stalking them. Patricia and Nuria huddled together, shivering, their bodies tense with fear that kept them on their toes. "We can't stay here," Nuria whispered, her eyes fixed on the broken window, hoping to see the shadow of the knife approaching. "I know," Patricia replied, squeezing her partner's hand, "but if we go out, he'll get us." The wind howled through the trees, making the walls of the cabin creak. Moonlight filtered through the broken window, casting strange shadows that played with their minds. Suddenly, a loud knock shook the door of the cabin. They both froze. Another knock, and then another. The man was out there. "Nuria," Patricia whispered. "I think he's trying to get in." The knocking stopped for a moment, and the silence was worse than the noise. Everything stood still. But then, a barely audible whisper began to fill the room. It wasn't the man's voice, but something much older, darker. The same guttural voices they had heard in the forest now echoed around them. "What is that?" Nuria asked, her eyes filled with terror. Before they could process it, a heart-rending scream filled the air. The man was right in front of the window, his face twisted by indescribable madness. He held the knife high, and his eyes shone with animal fury. Fear paralyzed them for an eternal second until Patricia reacted. "Run!" he shouted. They both jumped up, looking for an exit at the back of the cabin. A small window looked out onto the forest. Patricia, with desperate strength, broke the glass and helped Nuria out first. She barely made it through the narrow frame when she heard a creaking sound behind her. The man had entered the cabin. "Hurry up, Patricia!" Nuria shouted from the other side. Patricia threw herself out the window just as she felt a cold, rough hand try to grab her. She fell to the ground with a thud and rolled among the wet leaves. With no time to look back, they both ran again, deeper into the forest. Darkness surrounded them, and the sound of the man's footsteps came closer again, faster and faster. The fear was unbearable. The cold air filled their lungs as they ran desperately for their lives. They stumbled over roots and branches, but they kept going, driven by pure adrenaline. "I can't go on," Nuria gasped, stopping for a second. "No," Patricia shouted. "You have to keep going." But just then, Nuria saw something shining on the ground, next to a rock. Her eyes widened in surprise. "The keys to the van," she exclaimed, picking up the keys they had dropped in their initial escape. Hope was reborn in both of them. They turned towards the direction of the parking lot, knowing that they now had a chance to escape. The problem was that the man was behind them, getting closer, his breathing heavy and his knife threatening in the darkness. With the keys in their hands, they ran towards the parking lot with all their might. They knew that if they got to the car, they would have a chance, however small, to survive. Their heartbeats were the only thing they could hear as they ran, drenched in sweat and fear. The van finally appeared before them, like a saving vision. Nuria stumbled, but Patricia lifted her up, and together they launched themselves. Patricia opened the door with trembling hands, and, without looking back, they got inside. Patricia started the engine just as the man emerged from the trees, running towards them with the knife raised. The truck roared into motion, and Nuria, with tears in her eyes, shouted, "Go now!" The wheels skidded on the gravel, and the vehicle shot out onto the road, away from the cursed forest. They looked back in the rearview mirror, seeing how the figure of the man was left behind, lost in the shadows of the trees. When they were finally far away, they both began to cry, their bodies shaking, but knowing that, at least for now, they were safe.